Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Curtis, and I am the liaison with Food Export and based in Chicago. Thank you for joining this preview of the Focus Trade Mission to Bulgaria for feed ingredients. I am joined on this call with Carol Burnett, our activity coordinator, and also Jens, who is our in-market rep from Germany that will be leading the session in Bulgaria. This preview session is dedicated to the Focus Trade Mission for feed ingredients to discuss markets, products of interest, and general itinerary of the mission. We will also discuss the cost to participate as well as registration. This call will last about 30 minutes and will be recorded and posted to the event page. Everyone is automatically muted, and we encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A box, and we will answer those at the end. Lastly, you will see a slide of our liaison team with ways to contact your liaison at the end of the presentation. For those of you unfamiliar with Food Export, we are a nonprofit with 23 member states in the Midwest and Northeast. We provide the support for U.S. companies to enter international markets by offering education and strategies and marketing financial assistance. We have in-market reps throughout the world to assist U.S. exporters with their international marketing efforts. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Jens Hombeck, our in-market rep from Germany, whom you will meet in person if you decide to do this focused trade mission.
Thank you very much, Cindy, and good morning to everybody attending. I believe some of you are already met either at the World Pork Expo or at some other event taking place with Food Export. As Cindy introduced myself, I'm the in-market representative over here in Europe, taking care of all EU markets, and then we also cover Norway, Switzerland, and Turkey, which will become more interesting while looking at this trade mission, as we're going to include that market in it. So talking about feed, exactly, thanks, Sarah. So this particular mission, we cover Bulgaria, Romania, and then North Macedonia and Turkey. So it's pretty much a blend between EU markets and non-EU markets that becomes important when it comes to regulations. Upfront, we received some requests from companies, and I will talk a little bit more about this after going through the general information slides about how we can best assess which products might be suitable for this mission, which products might have potential, or if there are any obstacles for your company or for a company that you are working with, and then how we're going to deal with that and how we identify if this mission will be a fit for you or not. So we will stay in Bulgaria, but those markets are all pretty closely connected, bordering to each other, so it just makes sense to combine those. All of them can be considered. We leave Turkey aside a little bit. So the three other markets can be considered emerging markets. They are comparably small for European standards, but among the fastest growing regions on the continent. I don't know if you have seen it on the news or not. Most of the larger economies are struggling, and this has been going on for pretty much going back to the pandemic, and the larger ones are still in the process of overcoming it, while we see a lot of positive traction in the smaller Eastern EU economies that are a little bit more emerging, up-and-coming markets. All of the markets have pretty solid feed industries focused on particular breeding programs and particular animal produce. We will go into that on the next slides. But all of them offer potential for certain ingredients. All of them are, oh, we can skip one back. Sorry, Sarah. I was leading ahead a little bit. And then we have Turkey as a major market, mass market, which has been very important for Food Export when it comes to feed ingredients over past years. I don't know if you attended some of the buyers missions. I think since 2018, we regularly send over buyers from one of these markets, be it Bulgaria, be it Turkey, and maybe you already encountered one of them, maybe you even already started business with some of them, and gained some knowledge about the markets. Just some key facts you see down here when it comes to general economic performance, population growth, import value. So we're talking about a serious, interesting economic region over here. We aiming at around 12 to 15 buyers, and since we're covering several markets, we're going to focus at a core of Bulgarian buyers, And then we're going to invite buyers from Turkey and Romania and potentially North Macedonia as well to join the mission with us. So you get a chance to meet representatives from different markets and exploring different opportunities in the individual countries. Mainly it will be importers, distributors, a lot of some farming associations, then we have feed mills, manufacturers. So at the moment, we're talking with a lot of potential buyers there. And since you're joining this call, you're probably interested in learning, is this mission a good one for me? What companies will we have there? And we're pretty much dealing with the same the other way around. So we got a lot of buyers from the region asking us which products from the United States will be represented at the mission, what kind of companies will come over. To address that and to maybe also lead into checking and pre-qualifying if this mission will be an important one for you, you can always send over a brief summary of a company to me. We'll give it a pre-check, send it out to some of our contacts in the market and give you some feedback so you can assess if it makes sense for you to join this event. Now we can look a little bit more into the individual regions. We split it up into first Bulgaria and Romania. So you don't really have a lot of cattle farming there. It's mainly poultry and pig farming. Both are very substantial industries. Dairy is doing solid in both markets. Bulgaria a little bit less than Romania. But all of the markets are pretty mature when it comes to animal farming. Interesting when it comes from a consumer perspective. You probably heard it maybe from your domestic market, maybe from some other international markets before. Meat consumption is dropping. We see it in many markets in the EU, which of course also affects animal farming and the feed market in general. With these two companies, we actually see they are against the odds and have actually growing meat consumption, which obviously fuels especially pig and poultry farming. We got a solid egg farming industry as well. So those would be the cornerstones of the feed industry. You got a pretty good compound feed production within the markets, and those companies are dependent to a large part on imports. So there's a certain domestic production for a variety of grains and pulses, like chickpeas is a big commodity. Wheat has been pretty substantial, a little bit of corn, a little bit of barley, but the feed market depends on imports, and that's the same for both markets. Romania is one of the few soybean producers in Europe, but it is far from being self-sufficient on that. So both markets heavily depend on imports, mainly when it comes to soy. So we can slip to the next slide, give you a rough overview of some of the commodities that can work for the market. Obviously, it's only a glimpse, and the more technical we get and the more specialized your product or your product range might be, for those it makes sense to just look into a little bit more detail and see if there are companies actively looking for those products. The big one, kind of the elephant in the room, soy, animal protein, plant-based protein for animal breeding is the biggest commodity. It's a big thing all across Europe, and we have the same in these markets. So soybean meal is largely imported, everything soy related too. There's some feed mills, but a lot of soybean meal is already processed and then imported into the market. General interest in plant-based high protein components is there. So aside from soy, which is just a majority in the market, there's some interest to find alternatives to that. And then we go more into the markets for very specialized feeding and premixes that just antibiotic reduction is a big topic in the market and has been seen that a lot of producers are trying to reduce that, especially the ones that's selling into other European markets where that has become a big issue. You will see it in Turkey as well. So kind of generally making farming a little bit more sustainable, reducing additives, reducing antibiotics, and try to compensate it with more natural and plant-based components. You got the whole enzyme, peptides, amino acid range that is of interest. Vitamins, the market is highly dependent on foreign supply, mainly from China. So anything in that direction can work. And then growing based from the buyers and companies we work with in recent years, we've seen a lot of requests for things like yeast cultures, for milk replaces. For any product, talking about milk replaces and some of the other ones too, is always important. If you have any animal produce, animal content in your product, definitely check in with us to do kind of a compliance checkup. Especially for the European markets, you would need to have your plant approval to be eligible to import animal produce products. So that's something to be aware of. That's especially important for Romania and Bulgaria. For Turkey, we got the kind of advantage to not being part of the EU and therefore not being obligated to all of the regulations and restrictions. Some of them are similar, but yeah, anything related to you not being completely sure if your product is eligible and compliant with all the regulations, please reach out. We will do individual checkups and let you know, so you can either decide to go into this mission or decide, if you're not there yet when it comes to regulations, either work on it with us or you can just postpone it to later on. So looking at the Turkish market, for Romania and Bulgaria, we talked about poultry and pig farming. Here we got a lot of cattle, a lot of sheep and goat farming. Obviously, pig is not that big of a commodity in the market. And then dairy production, we saw a big hit when it comes to dairy in 2024. It was mainly due to a major price decrease in the market. So the dairy producers couldn't basically make a living out of their own production. So that led to a lot of slaughtering of dairy cows, female cattle. And so in the past year, the dairy market was a lot less productive than years before, just due to the change that going on in the year before. Chicken market and egg production is pretty strong in Turkey and is forecasted to remain there. One thing we haven't seen to a large extent in the other markets is fish farming. And it has become a pretty big driver of the feed market in Europe, in particular markets, especially like Scandinavia and Norway. You find it also in Turkey, and you got some freshwater farming as well as maritime farming. So any products, any components for fish farming, fish feed could be interesting for the Turkish market. Not so much for the other two, but still, if that's something that you cover in your company, or maybe one of your categories that you can supply, that would be interesting to look into. Beyond that, if we go to the next slide, when it comes to the commodities in Turkey, again, we got a very substantial compound feed production in the market. They produce some themselves, obviously, when it comes to grains and pulses. Again, chickpeas, we got red lentils, we got some peas. They're produced in Turkey, both for food as well as for the feed market, but a lot of it is also imported. So similar to the other two markets we talked about, the industry is not self-sufficient, so it depends on imports, and that's where the opportunities lies for foreign producers and for this trade mission. Again, feed additives, premixes, so it's pretty similar to what we talked about before. We saw some movement in the grains segment just due to, again, the market faced some issues with climate change and had some droughts in summer, so the harvest came in low, but those would be more momentary demands. So usually the market, when it comes to grains, is doing pretty well with domestic productions. So it's a pretty volatile situations depending on harvest outcome in the individual years. It's more like a pretty much first come, first serve opportunity option when it comes to those commodities, and not so much a long-term thinking trade business, because it's rather companies looking for substitutes if the domestic harvest or EU harvest came in low. Still something, if you got some oversupply in a warehouse and looking for a market to move into, it always makes sense to look into the harvest statistics and see if there are any openings, if there are any markets that came in lower than they used to, and because those can be short-term opportunities, but still opportunities to start and build a business. Important for all markets, obviously, it's kind of pretty much, you know, from any market, domestic and international markets, price, currency pressure is always a big topic. The upside at the moment is that compared to 1 year ago, the dollar is still rather low, which obviously for importers here, it's a good thing because it just levels out the pricing a little bit. Still, all markets are rather price sensitive. You get some pressure from domestic production as well as from supply from Asian and some Middle Eastern markets that bring product to lower prices. And obviously, everything within the EU is moving free across all borders. So they're saving shipping costs, they're saving duties, they're saving tariffs. Again, something we can do in pre-checks for this mission. Give you a rough overview of potential tariffs, potential duties that you might face for your product. So you can give it a rough calculation where your wholesale prices would need to be to stay competitive, which also can help you to assess if there's any potential for you to actually make a profitable business out of these markets. And then we already skipped one ahead, and that's okay. We can move to the next slide. So this is the tentative itinerary, which we're looking for. We try to keep this pretty brief. I don't know if you heard of the new government directive. It's about these missions, keeping them very on point, short, productive, in and out pretty much. And that's what we're trying to do here. So we will do obviously a market briefing. We have some representatives from the feed associations as well as from the local government authorities and FAS offices to give you a rundown of the different markets, what's going on, trends, developments, demands, and just general regulatory issues that might come up. And then we plan to do some plans or company visits around Sofia. Still working on that, which is kind of the ones that are closest by to avoid sitting on a bus a couple of hours on an afternoon. And then we have the main day on Tuesday, where we have the one-on-one meetings and most likely end with either a lunch or an evening reception, again, having more casual get-together with the buyers, with some of the representatives, with the embassy staff to just generate a network beyond the meetings. You probably, or at least most of you, most likely have attended either a buyer's mission or a trade mission. So, you know, these speed dating meetings can be quite short. So sometimes it's nice to have a reception afterwards to maybe circle back on what you talked about during the meetings, on the tables, or just catch up in a more casual setting than the formal meetings we have on the afternoon. And I think with that, I conclude the brief glimpse at the mission and hand it back to Cindy.
Great. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. So for this mission, the early bird registration deadline is February 6th, and the cost is $425. After that, it goes up to $625. That is our operations cost and not branded eligible. So hopefully, we definitely encourage people to sign up by the early bird just so they can start looking for buyers, you know, for your product as soon as possible. Next question, or next slide, please. These are the list of liaisons. If you have any questions, please reach out to your liaison. It's based on where your company is headquartered. Next slide. Okay, we have a few questions already, so I'll start with the first one. For products, what about mineral mixes?
We saw some interest in mineral mixes, so we can maybe break it down a little bit to in the individual markets. So the product obviously is already supplied into each of those markets. So it more comes down to a competitive scale when it comes to pricing. Still, I don't know who asked the questions, but if you like, maybe send over a brief, either a link to your product portfolio, if you got a product sheet, we look into it, and we can also share it with some of the potentially interested buyers and give you a profound feedback if that would be a commodity they're interested in, and maybe already some feedback when it comes to expectations the buyers might have when it comes to the competitive products already existing in the market to give you a better feel going into that mission.
Great, and there's two parts to this question. The first one is, feed in all these countries can accept GM ingredients?
Not in all of them, and not all of them. So the regulations in the markets differentiate. Some because of the difference between EU markets and non-EU markets. Regulations on certain GMO strains also differentiate. So it really comes down to the individual crop or product. And again, when it comes to a little bit more detail on which ones are allowed, which ones might be challenging, please send just some additional information on the specific item you're interested in, because then we can give you a more profound information if there's a challenge in one of those markets, if it's allowed in all markets, or if there's a difference between the individual countries.
Okay, and then the second part is Turkey is following EU law or its own feed law.
So Turkey has its own feed law. Some of it is similar to what you find in Europe, but the market in general is less restricted. I would consider the EU highly restrictive, especially when it comes to imports of either GMO or animal produce. And Turkey is a lot less regulated. Still, there's obviously compliance that you have to be aware about, but compared to dealing with the EU, it has been also confirmed by some American suppliers we worked with in the past. It has been, from an experience factor, easier to deal with than with some of the EU regulations you find.
Great. Another question is if I'm not sure if my product is a good fit, I can take this a little bit. Just definitely reach out to your liaison and send your questions and your thoughts on your products, and we can send it to Jens and he can review it and send back some feedback. So we encourage you to send more questions than not. We are happy to follow up and answer all those questions.
Maybe to second that, just real brief thing, sorry. I mean, obviously the feed market is pretty broad and wide scale. So the more information you can give us about your specific product or your specific commodity helps us to give you a better founded estimate if there are any opportunities or any obstacles.
Yes. One more question. There are several countries in Southern Europe that are not part of the EU. I assume each country has its own feed ingredient registration rules. It's a little bit more broader than just the question on Turkey.
Yeah, but the answer is actually pretty similar to Turkey. Yes. So all non-EU markets have their own national regulations. Still, it depends a little bit on which market you're talking about. The ones trying to become a member of the EU have already started the process to harmonize a lot of their regulations with European law. So it depends a little bit on the individual market. But yes, all of them has natural differences that you would have to look into in particular to figure out if there are any challenges or not.
Definitely. And also, there was a question just clarifying someone who uses the branded program, which is our cost share program. This event is eligible for travel for 2 travelers for economy air, hotel, and meals and incidentals are added on the back end, but we can provide you with the per diem for the countries that you're in, and those are reimbursed at 50% for air, hotel, and the reimbursements. Thank you, Jens. That's all of our questions, unless anyone has any last minute ones to pop in right now. Otherwise, thank you so much for that great presentation. And I know many people will look forward to hopefully meeting you in person in Germany very soon. Thank you so much for joining.